Hey everyone, I am T-Rex and today I'm doing my review of The Dark Knight Rises. This is my third review in the Dark Knight Trilogy, and if you would like to see my review of Batman Begins, click the card right up here where I did a video on it. And I also did my review of The Dark Knight, so there's going to be a card up there as well, so you can click on that to see my review of The Dark Knight. If you would like to see my review of another Batman movie recently, I did a review of the Lego Batman movie, and you can check that out in the card that I'm going to put up here as well. And anyways, with that out of the way, let's start with my review of The Dark Knight Rises. First off, this is the third movie in the Dark Knight trilogy by Christopher Nolan, and this movie picks up nearly directly after The Dark Knight. And this film instantly shows us what has happened after it, and we get this feeling that Gotham is better off, but that lie that Commissioner Gordon is having to keep telling is really hard, along with the destruction of what Batman was and his idea and the symbol he was, is really having a hard toll on him, Batman, and Commissioner Gordon. Off the bat, this film does a great job of showing how much Gotham has changed since the ramifications and what has happened since the Joker happened. And the movie really feels like the aftermath of a terrible situation. Also, we very quickly are reintroduced to Bruce Wayne, who's now a lot more beat up and brittle and an older man, along with Catwoman and Bane very quickly. Instantly with Bane, we are instantly shown how evil he is and how he just doesn't have that feeling of human emotion. The line that perfectly captures is where Batman says that Bane is just pure evil, and Bane's response is that unnecessary evil. And this is the story of how the title, which of the movie is The Dark Knight Rises, where it really shows how will Batman rise from this defeat since The Dark Knight against a formidable opponent like Bane, who really just sees himself as like this cleansing. So this film does a great job of showing us how distant we are since that time where Batman was really in his prime, and right now he just isn't as strong as he used to be. It gives us this very interesting dynamic of how he feels like someone who's just right out of his prime and broken, but needs to stop this man who just wants to destroy Gotham like the Joker and Ra's al Ghul. And this is easily the most complex film in the entire franchise, as it's trying to go for a huge payoff while also trying to wrap up the entire trilogy. So there are a lot of plot lines in this movie, and there's a lot in the mix, and especially early on, it's actually pretty easy to get lost in where we are and what is exactly happening, as none of these plot lines are exactly bad, but they all feel that they're there to set up a payoff that feels a little too rushed at times. I just kind of wish there were more plot lines that were developed in earlier films. Like, I would have loved to see more of Officer Blake in The Dark Knight. I really like him, but in this film he gets set up very quickly, and I just wish we could have had him a bit longer. That way his arc would have paid off a bit more. They really try to set him up early, but it's really hard to set up a character and also resolve a character as well. The film already had a humongous task of trying to wrap up the entire Dark Knight trilogy, and I feel like they made it a little harder on themselves by setting up even more plot lines, that way that they could just have a bigger payoff. That's not a bad idea, it's just the problem is this is kind of the finale, so it's really hard for you to add a lot of plot lines if you're really trying to resolve a lot of plot lines as well. Now, luckily though, since they set up a lot of plot lines, they really are able to land this ending. This is one of my favorite endings in any film. I feel even though there are a lot of things being set up, the last 5 minutes are some of the best you will see in any film, as it feels that everything masterfully concludes in one perfect shot towards the end. I think that Nolan definitely knew where he wanted to go towards the end of the film, and he really stuck the landing and got exactly what he wanted with all that payoff. At times it felt like, oh, do we really need all these plot lines? But the way it actually ends up playing out, it actually makes you think, well, maybe some of those plot lines were worth it because the ending is just so good. Now, having a lot of plot lines isn't a bad thing as long as it doesn't hurt the pacing. Go look at The Dark Knight, but I think the pacing in this film really suffers from all these plot lines. There are a lot of scenes that just don't feel as necessary as other scenes. The main film you kind of forget is happening because you're with Ben Mendelsohn as his character, or with Catwoman, and you sometimes forget what actually Batman is doing, which is kind of weird since it's a Batman movie. It feels with all these plot lines, the main narrative, which for me is by far the most interesting one, is kind of diluted and not focused on as much. This type of pacing is not the best, and it feels like the main narrative really suffers a bit, but it does make scenes that have more action way more impactful in a weird way. Since we are seeing the world through so many different characters, when Batman shows up, it feels kind of like the viewers in the shoes of these people, being their favorite hero coming back to fight evil. Especially towards the end when they really put you in the shoes of the people, this pretty choppy pacing in some ways makes scenes of Batman more powerful because it feels like we haven't seen him in a while, so when he returns it's really awesome. So these action scenes are easily the best in the franchise in my opinion. The return of Batman on the Batpod is absolutely amazing, along with the first fights between Batman and Bane in the sewers. It honestly has this feeling of fear and tension that you can't escape These scenes in this movie are just so good. There are so many scenes that you can pick out as favorites. I think that's something this film does amazingly well. Although the pacing just doesn't really hold up, these scenes when you get to them are just so amazing. This film as well maybe has the best tone and message of being able to rise from anything. This film is able to resonate with anyone watching, because as you're watching Gotham being torn apart and you have this feeling of dread and just not being able to do anything, that makes it very emotional for everyone watching, because there's a lot of humanity in the idea of trying your best and just not being able to help. And I think that's something that makes this film way more emotional and maybe has the most humanity in any of the Batman films. Along with that, you're able to really resonate with Batman, and these characters in this film are so good. These characters in this film are such good compliments to Batman, as Batman is trying basically to come back from his defeat against Joker and having to fight people like Bane, and then you have people like Catwoman telling him he just can't do it along with Bane. He's like, you're just not as strong. You even have people like Alfred who feels against him, not in the mean way, but because he's so nervous he's gonna die. So speaking of Alfred, Michael Caine might give his best performance as Alfred here. He is amazing. But you also have people like Officer Blake who are on the opposite side of saying to Batman, oh, you can't do it, but they're like, no, you can. You have people like Officer Blake and Gordon just wanting to help him and wanting Batman to help people rise up against problems. It's a really interesting dynamic of all these characters with different motives, and in the center of it's Batman trying to figure out what to do and how to help the city. At that center of the story, you have Batman, just a man who's broken, trying to do his best, who's not in his prime, and that's such an interesting dynamic. He has his motives, and there's a lot of other characters with their goals in mind. These are probably the best that some of these characters are. I think this story really allows these characters to be pushed to their limits and really give us a fantastic send-off to these characters, as this is a very emotional and character-based story. The fact that the characters are some of the best in the entire franchise and the characters in this film are so good is really awesome, because that really helps the film as a whole, and the characters are some of the easiest standouts when it comes to looking back on this film. Although this film is nowhere as precise in storytelling as the first two movies in this trilogy, it has the ambition where it counts, leading to scenes that have just such an impact, along with these complex characters being really pushed to their limits and really showing the human spirit of perseverance. It might feel choppy and not as smooth around the edges as other films that came out before it, but I think it leads to a payoff and ending that most films can only dream of achieving. For that reason, I'm going to say that The Dark Knight Rises is awesome. Remember, my rating of awesome doesn't mean it's perfect, but it is my highest rating I give, so take that as you will. Remember, this Friday I will be doing my full series review of WandaVision as it wraps up, along with probably another WandaVision video on Sunday or Monday. So I want to review a new trilogy of films, and I want to do something, it's going to sound dumb, called Monkey March, where I will review some movies starring monkeys in them. So probably this Saturday my review for Rise of the Planet of the Apes will be out, and look out for that when that comes out. And I'll be reviewing that trilogy, and when that comes out, I'll see you then. Bye.